The night by the door, the wind screamed across the barren colony outpost, carrying fine dust that scraped against metal walls like ghostly fingers. Ethan Cole sat inside his small, dimly lit workshop, the only sound the quiet hum of an old heater. It was a lonely night, like most nights for him, and the sky outside was empty. No ships, no movement, just silence. He was used to silence, but tonight, there was something different in it, somewhere beyond the howling wind. There was another sound, soft, uneven, almost like a whimper. At first, he thought it was the heater breaking down again. But when it came a second time, closer now, he froze. It was coming from the front door. Slowly, Ethan stood. His boots scraping against the metal floor, he reached for the old plasma pistol on the table, just in case, and walked to the door. Another sound, this time, a faint scratching. Something small. But desperate, Ethan pressed his ear to the cold metal. Listening, the wind howled again, but through it he heard breathing fast. Shallow, frightened breathing. Without thinking too much, he unlatched the door, letting it swing open with a groan. The cold hit him first, sharp and biting. Then he saw her. A small figure crouched on the doorstep, half hidden in the shadows. Her fur, yes, fur, was damp with frost. Clinging in uneven tufts, large golden eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, fixed on him, unblinking. She was trembling, not just from cold, but from fear. Her thin arms were wrapped around herself, and a long, bushy tail was curled tight around her legs. For a second, neither moved. Ethan had seen plenty of aliens in his life, but this one was different. She looked young, maybe no older than a child, yet there was something wild in her eyes, something that warned him she was no ordinary stray. The wind pushed dust between them, and she flinched at the sound, pressing herself tighter against the doorframe. "What are you doing?" "Out here?" Ethan asked, his voice low. She didn't answer. Her gaze darted past him into the warmth of the workshop, then back to the darkness behind her. It was like she was weighing a choice. Stay out there with whatever hunted her, or step inside. Ethan stepped back, opening the door wider. "You can come in," he said. Still no words from her, but her ears, small, triangular, and tipped with black fur, twitched. Slowly, cautiously, she moved, her bare feet silent on the metal floor as she crossed the threshold. Ethan shut the door behind her, and for a moment, the outside world disappeared. The girl stayed close to the door, crouched low, eyes scanning every corner of the room. Ethan kept his distance, setting the pistol back on the table. "Do you have a name?" He tried again. She only stared. But when the heater clicked and warm air filled the room, her body relaxed, just slightly. Ethan fetched a blanket from the cot in the corner. She didn't move when he placed it beside her, but a moment later, her small hands reached out and pulled it tight around herself. Her claws, short but sharp, caught on the fabric. He noticed then the faint marks on her wrists, thin, circular scars, like something had once been chained there. The storm outside grew louder, rattling the windows. Ethan glanced toward the door, his instincts prickling. She noticed too, her ears twitching again, her gaze snapping to the door. Her breathing quickened. That's when he realized she wasn't just cold. She was running from something. "You're safe here," Ethan said, though he wasn't sure why he was making that promise to a stranger. Her eyes flicked to his face, studying him. Then, for the first time, she made a sound, a soft, low growl, not in threat, but in warning. Ethan followed her gaze back to the door. Through the howl of the wind, he thought he heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching in the dust. Someone was out there. The girl tensed, her tail curling tighter around her legs. Ethan moved to the light switch, cutting the lamps until only the faint heater glow remained. They waited in the dark. The footsteps paused just outside. Ethan's hand moved quietly toward the pistol again. Minutes passed, the sound faded, and the girl's shoulders eased just slightly. Still, she didn't speak. When Ethan offered her a place on the cat, she refused, curling instead right by the door as if guarding it. Or waiting, her eyes stayed half open even as sleep took her. Ethan sat at his workbench, watching her, wondering who or what she was. The storm would last until morning, but deep in his gut, Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The morning that changed everything, the first light of dawn slipped through the cracks in the workshop shutters. Painting the floor in thin lines of pale gold, Ethan woke with a stiff neck. Still sitting at his workbench, the faint hum of the heater. The only sound. For a moment, he thought the events of last night had been some strange dream. But when he looked toward the door, she was gone. The blanket lay crumpled in a heap where she had been. No footprints on the floor, no sign she had even been there. Ethan rubbed his eyes, wondering if he had imagined it all. He stood and walked to the door, unlatching it slowly. The cold morning air rushed in, crisp and dry, carrying the scent of dust. And there she was, sitting just outside on the small step. Her fur glistening faintly in the rising sun, her tail wrapped neatly around her legs, golden eyes fixed on him as if she'd been waiting. When she saw him, she tilted her head slightly, a quiet gesture that felt more like acknowledgement than greeting. Morning, Ethan muttered, unsure if she would answer. She didn't speak. But her ears twitched at the sound of his voice. He stepped outside, the sand crunching under his boots. The outpost was waking up a few traders opening their stalls. A repair drone buzzing past overhead. The girl rose silently and fell into step behind him, her movements graceful and quiet. Ethan frowned, glancing over his shoulder. You following me? Still no answer, just a faint flicker of her tail. As they walked toward the main street, he began to notice the stares. People paused mid-step, their conversations breaking off as their eyes locked on the Wolfgirl. A few mothers pulled their children closer. Two minors whispered urgently. One of them shaking his head, Ethan ignored it. But the weight of their looks pressed on him near the market gates. A voice called out, Hey, Cole, what's that you've got? It was Jaren, a broad-shouldered man who ran the scrapyard. Ethan shrugged, found her outside last night. Jaren's eyes narrowed. You'd better be careful. That thing brings trouble. Ethan stopped, his tone sharper than he intended. She's not a thing. Jaren didn't argue, but his look said enough. Whatever she was, the town didn't want her here. They moved deeper into the market, past stalls overflowing with old ship parts, alien fabrics, and the smell of fried root cakes. The Wolfgirl stayed close, her sharp eyes darting from face to face, scanning rooftops, alleyways. It wasn't nervousness, it was vigilance. Ethan realized she was tracking something he couldn't see. He bought some supplies, spare filters, pack of ration bars, and was turning back toward home when it happened. From the far end of the market, a tall figure froze, eyes locked on them. An alien, skin a pale metallic sheen, armor etched with strange sigils. The alien tapped a wrist, speaking quickly in a language Ethan didn't know. Then, with a voice that carried across the market, he said in trade common, the escaped asset is here. The words hit Ethan like a punch. Heads turned, whispers spread like wildfire. The Wolfgirl's ears flattened against her head. Her tail stiff, Ethan didn't have time to ask questions. Movement on the rooftops caught his eye. Two more armored aliens appeared, rifles slung across their backs. Scanning the crowd. Stay close, Ethan said under his breath. She didn't need telling twice. Pressing against his side as they moved toward a side alley, but the crowd shifted strangely. People stepping aside for the soldiers, giving them a clear path. Whoever these pursuers were, they had authority here, and they were closing in fast. Ethan took a sharp turn into a narrow alley between a spice stall and a repair shed. The girl followed, her bare feet silent. Behind them, footsteps. Pounded, they ducked under hanging cables, leaped over a crate. The smell of engine oil and dust filled the air as Ethan led her through the twisting back paths only locals knew. One wrong turn and they were trapped. A dead end with a rusted fence. The Wolfgirl's breathing was fast now, her eyes wide. For the first time since he'd met her, she spoke, her voice small but urgent. Please. Just one word, but it carried a weight that hit Ethan deep in his chest without hesitation. He pulled her toward a loose panel in the fence. Shoving it aside, they slipped through into the back of his workshop. Slamming the panel shut behind them, Ethan locked the door, heart pounding. She stood in the center of the room, her fur bristling, eyes fixed on the entrance. It was then he noticed the thin, jagged scars along her arms, and something burned into the skin near her shoulder. A mark, not natural, more like a brand. He didn't know what kind of asset they thought she was. But it was clear now she was running from people who would never let her go outside. Distant shouts echoed through the streets. The hunt had begun. The chase through the market, the sounds outside were getting louder. Metal boots striking against the dusty ground, voices barking orders in a language Ethan didn't understand. The Wolfgirl Lyra, though he still didn't know her name yet, stood frozen in the middle of the room, her ears turning like radar dishes, tracking every noise. Ethan knew they couldn't stay here. The market wasn't far. And once soldiers started searching door to door, his workshop would be next. He grabbed a small pack from the shelf, stuffing it with ration bars, water, and a compact medkit. Come on, he said, keeping his voice low. Her golden eyes darted to him. Then to the door. Not that way, Ethan whispered, moving toward the back exit that led into a maze of alleys. She hesitated only a moment before following her steps light. And silent, they slipped out into the narrow passage. The smell of frying oil and dust mixing in the air. From here, Ethan could already see the main market square. Crowded and noisy, he hoped the chaos would help them blend in. But the moment they stepped into the open, he realized that hope was already fading. 2 alien soldiers were patrolling near the stalls, their armor catching the sunlight, weapons hanging loose but ready. Their eyes scanned the crowd, sharp and alert. Ethan pulled the Wolfgirl into the shadow of a cloth seller's stand. Stay behind me, he murmured. She didn't speak, but her tail had gone stiff. The fur along it bristling, they moved quickly through the stalls, weaving between merchants shouting prices and customers arguing over goods. Every time Ethan glanced back, she was right there, so close he could feel the warmth of her breath when the crowd pressed in. But it wasn't the crowd that worried him, it was the way the soldiers moved. They weren't wandering aimlessly, they were following a signal. And from the way their heads kept turning toward his direction, that signal was getting stronger. They were almost at the south exit of the market when the voice came again. Deep and commanding. Stop where you are, asset. The word made the Wolfgirl flinch. Ethan turned. And there he was, the same tall alien from before. The pale metallic, skin shining under the twin suns. His hand rested casually on the grip of his weapon. But his eyes, they were locked on her. The girl's breathing turned sharp. Ethan stepped sideways, putting himself between her and the soldier. I think you've got the wrong people, he said, his tone even. The alien's eyes flicked to him briefly, then back to her. She belongs to us. Step aside and live. That was the moment Ethan made a choice. Without another word, he grabbed the Wolfgirl's wrist and bolted into the nearest side street. Shouts erupted behind them. The crowd scattered as soldiers gave chase, their heavy boots pounding against the stone. The narrow street twisted left and right, lined with rusted doors and flickering light panels. Ethan didn't dare slow down. The Wolfgirl kept pace easily, her movements almost animal, leaping over crates, slipping through gaps before he even saw them. Once She darted ahead and pulled him sharply to the right. Saving them from running straight into a patrol, they burst out into a wider section of the market where open food stalls filled the air with steam and sharp spices. The noise here was deafening, sellers shouting, grinders worry. A dozen different alien tongues mixing in the air. It was perfect cover, but only if they kept moving. Ethan grabbed a loose tarp from a merchant's pile and threw it over her head and shoulders. "Don't take it off," he said. Her golden eyes glinted from beneath the fabric, but she obeyed. They were halfway across when a new voice shouted, "There, by the spice cart." Ethan didn't look back. He just ran. The Wolfgirl matched his speed, the tarp streaming behind her as they cut between stalls, scattering bowls of dried herbs and sacks of grain. A shot rang out. The sound was like a crack of thunder, and a bolt of plasma scorched the wall just inches from Ethan's head. Screams rose from the crowd, and panic rippled through the market. People shoved past them, some fleeing, some simply trying not to get involved. Ethan pushed forward, heart hammering. Finally, they reached the far edge of the market, a narrow service lane behind the vendors. It smelled of waste, oil, and stale air, but it was empty. Ethan slowed just enough to catch his breath. The Wolfgirl pulled the tarp away, her ears flicking rapidly as she listened. Then she spoke, her voice low but firm. "They will not stop." Ethan stared at her. It was the first real sentence she'd spoken since please. He wanted to ask 100 questions, but footsteps were already echoing down the lane. The soldiers had found their trail again. "Come on," he said, and they darted toward the far end. As they ran, Ethan noticed a deep, jagged scar along the side of her neck, just under the fur. It wasn't random, it looked surgical. And suddenly, pieces started clicking together. The asset label, the way they tracked her, the fear in her eyes. They weren't just hunting her because she escaped, they had made her into something. Something they weren't willing to lose. And now, by protecting her, Ethan had just made himself their next target. Asterisk. Secrets of the Wolfgirl didn't stop running until they reached the far edge of the colony. Here, the buildings were older, leaning against each other like tired giants. The streets empty, except for drifting scraps of paper and the low hum of old generators. Ethan led her into a narrow storage shed that hadn't been used in years. Pushing the door shut behind them, the air inside was musty, filled with the scent of old wood and rust. Only then did he let himself breathe. The girl leaned against the wall, her chest rising and falling quickly. Her fur was damp with sweat, and a few strands clung to her face. Ethan noticed the thin chain marks around her wrists again. Deeper now that he was closer, he crouched in front of her, trying to catch her gaze. "Who are you?" he asked softly. For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then she spoke. Her voice low but steady. "Lyra." The name lingered in the air like something fragile. Ethan repeated it quietly. "Lyra." She nodded once, her golden eyes watching him closely. "You were right," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "They will not stop until they have me." Ethan sat back, running a hand through his hair. "Why? What do they want with you?" Her ears lowered, and for a second, she looked younger, almost like a scared child again. "They made me," she said finally, "in a lab. Far from here." The words made Ethan's stomach tighten. "Made you?" he asked. Lyra shifted uncomfortably, her claws curling against the floor. "They took me from my pack when I was small. They cut into me, put things inside me. They said I was going to be their weapon." Ethan's gaze dropped to the jagged scar on her neck. "That's where they put the tracker." Lyra nodded slowly. "It is inside me still. I can feel it. They always know where I am." Silence filled the shed for a moment. Outside, distant voices called to each other. But they weren't close. Not yet. Ethan leaned forward, his voice firm. If we get that tracker out, they can't find you." Her eyes widened, and for the first time, there was a flicker of hope in them. But just as quickly, it faded. "They will still come. But slower," she said, "and they will be angry." Ethan almost smiled. She spoke as if she was used to measuring danger. "How far have you run?" he asked. Lyra's tail shifted slowly behind her. 2 planets. 5 colonies. Every time I find a place to hide, they come. I stopped trusting anyone. Her gaze softened just a little. "Until you?" Those words hit Ethan harder than he expected. He'd never thought of himself as someone worth trusting. Not since the mission that left him stranded here. But there was no time to think about that now. "We can get the tracker out tonight," he said. "I have the tools in my workshop." Lyra shook her head quickly, ears twitching. "It is dangerous. If you cut wrong, I will not wake." Ethan met her eyes. "I fixed engines that were falling apart in the middle of a war zone. I can handle this." Her lips curved slightly, the smallest ghost of a smile. "You compare me to an engine." Ethan smirked. "One of the most important ones I've ever worked on." For the first time since he met her, Lyra's shoulders relaxed. Not much, but enough to tell him she wanted to believe him. Ethan pulled a small scanner from his pack. A handheld device older than both of them. He switched it on, and the blue light washed over her almost immediately. The screen lit up with a pulsing red dot embedded deep near her collarbone. "There it is," he said. Lyra watched the screen quietly. Her claws digging into the floor. The voices outside grew faint. For now, the search had moved away. Ethan stood, offering his hand. "Come on. We go back to my place before they think to look there again." She hesitated, then placed her smaller hand in his. Her claws careful not to scratch him. That simple act, her choosing to touch him, felt heavier than all the words they'd exchanged so far. They moved quickly through the back streets, sticking to shadows. Every time Ethan glanced back, Lyra was right there, light on her feet, her eyes always scanning the rooftops. By the time they reached the workshop, the suns were beginning to sink, painting the sky in shades of amber and red inside. Ethan locked the door and pulled the curtains tight. Lyra stayed by the table, watching him set out the tools, a mix of medical instruments and modified mechanics gear. He explained the plan as simply as he could. "I'll use the scanner to guide the incision, pull the tracker, and close the wound all in one go." Lyra's ears twitched nervously, but she didn't back away. Instead, she sat down, tilting her head to expose the side of her neck. "You must be quick," she said. "They will know the moment it stops sending." Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. This wasn't just about removing a tracker. It was about cutting the chain that had been wrapped around her since she was a child, and he was ready to break it. Breaking the chains, the small workshop was quiet, except for the steady hum of the old heater. Ethan had laid out every tool with precision. The scanner, the sterilizer, the surgical knife, the old clamp, and a medgel tube that was nearly empty. Lyra sat on the metal table, her legs tucked in, her ears angled back in silent tension. The golden light from the fading suns filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the floor. "You ready?" Ethan asked. Lyra's tail shifted once, then curled tightly around her legs. "Yes," she said softly, though her voice betrayed a trace of fear. Ethan took a deep breath and switched on the scanner. The blue light passed over her neck and collarbone, the screen flashing the pulsing red dot again. "Still there," he muttered. "We'll get it out." He cleaned the knife with a rag soaked in sterilizer, the sharp scent filling the air. Lyra watched him with those unblinking golden eyes. "You are not afraid?" she asked suddenly. Ethan gave a small smile. "I've been through worse. And so have you." She tilted her head slightly, as if she wasn't sure whether to believe him. "Lean forward a bit," Ethan instructed. She obeyed, her fur brushing against his hand, warm and soft under his fingers, with the scanner in one hand. He guided the blade with the other. The first cut was small. Careful. Lyra's claws tightened around the edge of the table, her breath catching. "You okay?" He asked quickly. "Yes." "Keep going," she said through clenched teeth. The faint hum of the scanner guided him deeper. Then he saw it. A small metallic shard embedded in her flesh, faintly glowing with an unnatural light. It was no bigger than a fingernail. But Ethan knew this tiny device had been the chain keeping her trapped her whole life. "Almost there," he murmured. He slid the clamp in, gripping the tracker carefully. The moment the metal touched it, Lyra gasped sharply. Her entire body tensing, Ethan pulled gently but firmly. The tracker came free with a wet sound. The glow flickering out for a heartbeat. The room was still. Then a loud, high-pitched tone rang from the device. Not from the tracker itself, but from somewhere far away. Lyra's ears shot up. Her eyes wide. "They know," she said. Her voice low and urgent. Ethan tossed the tracker into a small containment box and slammed the lid shut. "Hold still," he ordered, applying the med gel to close the wound. The cool substance hissed on contact, sealing the cut in seconds. Outside, the air changed. The hum of the workshop's walls trembled with a distant vibration. Ethan froze for a moment, recognizing the sound instantly. Engines. Big ones, coming down from orbit. He rushed to the window, peeling back the curtain just enough to see the dark silhouettes of ships descending toward the colony, sleek, sharp. Designs that didn't belong to any peaceful fleet. Lyra had joined him at the window, her expression unreadable. "They bring hunters and warband," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't scared now. It was cold. Certain. Ethan turned away, grabbing his pack from the corner. "We have to move," he said. Lyra's gaze met his, steady and calm. "They will burn this place to the ground for me, then we won't be here when they do," Ethan replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. They moved fast, Ethan stuffing tools and rations into the pack while Lyra kept watch at the door. The low thrum of the ships grew louder, joined by the faint, distant thump of landing struts hitting the ground. Shouts echoed from the main street as people ran to hide or closed up their shops. Somewhere closer, a metallic voice barked orders. Over a cum, Ethan tightened the straps on the pack. "We'll head for the desert. They won't risk sending too many troops out there at night." Lyra's ears twitched, but she nodded as they stepped outside. The last light of the suns dipped below the horizon, plunging the colony into the cool blue of evening. They stuck to the alleys, avoiding the main road where armed soldiers now patrolled. The air smelled of fuel and burning metal. Twice, they had to duck into doorways to avoid patrols. Lyra moved like a shadow, her steps silent, her breathing controlled. Ethan followed her lead now. She had a predator's instinct for avoiding danger. When they reached the outer wall of the colony, Ethan pulled out a small cutting tool and began slicing through the old maintenance grate. The metal gave way with a low screech, and they slipped through into the open desert beyond. Behind them, the colony lights glowed faintly against the darkening sky. Above, the warband ships hovered like silent predators, their light sweeping the ground. They walked quickly, heading toward the distant rocky ridges that would give them cover. Lyra stayed close, her eyes scanning the shadows. "You risk much for me," she said after a while. Ethan glanced at her. "Maybe. But I'm not about to let them take you back." She looked away, but the faint curve of her mouth told him she understood. Far behind them, a low roar broke the stillness. Engines powering up again. "They will send hunters into the desert," Lyra said. Ethan tightened his grip on the strap of his pack. "Then we'd better be ready." The night was only beginning, and the real fight hadn't even started yet. The stand at the outpost, the desert night, was colder than the colony streets. The wind moved in long sighs, carrying the scent of dry stone and old sand. Ethan and Lyra moved quickly, their shadows long under the pale light of the twin moons. Far behind, the colony's glow faded, replaced by the dark silhouettes of warband ships resting on their landing struts. They were making good distance when Lyra suddenly stopped. Her ears twitched, her head turning slightly toward the east. "What is it?" Ethan whispered. "They hunt," she said quietly. Her voice like a warning growl. Ethan scanned the dark horizon but saw nothing. "How can you tell?" "They move wrong," she replied. "Not wind, not night hunters." They pressed on toward the rocky ridges, but Lyra's pace shifted, slower, more deliberate. Ethan realized she was tracking something unseen. Her claws dug lightly into the sand as she moved, her tail low. Ethan tightened his grip on the small plasma pistol at his belt, hardly enough against an armed warband, but it was all he had. The first sign came as a flicker in the shadows ahead, then a glint, the reflection of moonlight on metal Lyra's. Hands shot out, pushing Ethan hard to the side. A bolt of plasma scorched the ground where he'd been standing. The smell of burned sand hit the air. "Run!" She barked, but Ethan didn't move far. If they were surrounded, running would just mean getting picked off. Shapes emerged from the darkness. Moving with the smooth precision of trained killers, there were 6 of them, armored, masked, weapons. Raised, their leader stepped forward, his voice sharp through a voice modulator. "Hand over the asset and live." Ethan's jaw tightened. Not happening. The leader didn't waste words. He raised a hand, and the hunters closed in. Lyra stepped in front of Ethan, her body low, her claws unsheathing with a soft, lethal sound. Her fur bristled, ears pinned back, golden eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. The first hunter lunged. Lyra moved faster, a blur of motion as she leaped, her claws raking across his visor. Sparks flying, he went down hard. Another swung his rifle like a club, but she twisted aside, kicking his legs out. From under him, Ethan fired at the third, the shot catching him in the shoulder and spinning him back. But the hunters adapted quickly, forming a half circle, one aimed directly at Ethan. Lyra was on him before he could fire, knocking the weapon away and slamming him into the sand. Her movements were pure instinct, fluid, deadly, Ethan realized. With a shiver that this was what they had made her for. But here, she wasn't fighting for them. She was fighting for him. A bolt grazed Ethan's arm. Burning through his jacket, he stumbled, but Lyra was already there, pulling him behind. The cover of a rock outcrop. Her breathing was fast, her eyes scanning for the next move. "They will not stop," she said again. "Not until one of us is gone." 2 hunters advanced on their position. Ethan leaned out, firing twice, forcing them back. But the leader was still standing, watching her with something between anger and fascination. "You belong to us," he said, his tone almost calm despite the fight. Lyra's ears flicked, and for the first time, she bared her teeth in a full, sharp snarl. "I belong to my pack," she growled. Then, without hesitation, she looked over her shoulder at Ethan and added, "And my pack is him." The words hit Ethan like a shock. There was no time to respond. The hunters charged again. Lyra met them head-on, moving with blinding speed, her claws flashing in the moonlight. Ethan backed her up, firing at any target that broke through her reach. When the dust finally settled, 4 hunters lay on the sand, unmoving. The last 2 dragged the injured leader back toward the darkness. "This is not over," he shouted, his voice echoing into the night. Lyra stood perfectly still until they were gone, her chest rising and falling. Only then did she turn to Ethan. He noticed her left arm had a deep burn from a plasma shot. "Let me see that," he said, moving closer. She didn't pull away this time. Instead, she sat down on the sand, letting him wrap it with a strip of cloth from his pack. Her golden eyes stayed on him the whole time. "You fight like pack," she said quietly. Ethan gave a small smile. "Guess that makes us even?" In the distance, the warband ships still waited. But for tonight, the desert belonged to them, together. Everywhere the first light of dawn crept over the desert. The sand shimmered pale gold under the twin suns. Ethan sat on a flat rock, his pistol resting beside him, watching the horizon. Beside him, Lyra crouched low, ears forward, eyes sharp, scanning for movement. It had been a long night too. Long, and both of them carried fresh wounds, but they had survived in the far distance. Small specks appeared against the sky. Lyra's posture shifted instantly. "Not hunters," she said, her voice certain. "My people." Ethan glanced. At her, "Your people." "You mean they tracked me?" she said quietly, "but not to take me back to the lab. These are the free ones, the ones who escaped long before I did." The ships grew larger as they approached, sleek and shaped like the hunting birds Ethan had seen once on Earth. They landed in the open sand with a hiss of hot air, the heat shimmering in waves. Figures emerged, tall, lean. Fur like Lyra's, but marked with different colors and patterns. They moved with purpose, but not hostility. Their eyes fixed on her. A taller wolf-like alien stepped forward, his fur silver with age. "Lyra," he said in their own tongue, his voice carrying a deep warmth. Lyra stepped forward slowly, almost hesitantly. "This is Elder Koresh," she murmured to Ethan without looking away from the silver-furred figure. The elder's gaze swept over her, noting her wounds, the brand mark. The way she stood protectively in front of Ethan. "You are safe now," Koresh said. "Come. With us, we will take you far from this place, where they can never touch you again." For a moment, Ethan said nothing. He wanted her safe. He wanted her far from hunters. From warbands, from this endless running. And if that meant letting her go, he would. He didn't say it out loud. But something in his chest felt heavier with every second of silence. But Lyra didn't move toward them. She glanced back at Ethan, golden eyes meeting his. Her ears twitched once, slowly, then she turned back to the elder and said, "My place is with my pack." A quiet ripple moved through the gathered aliens' surprise. Murmurs, even disapproval from some. Koresh's eyes narrowed slightly. "Your pack? You mean the human?" Lyra's tail flicked once, firm. "Yes, he fought for me, bled for me, refused to give me back when it would have saved him. He is my pack now." Ethan cleared his throat awkwardly. "Look, you think I'm keeping her against her?" Will the elder raised a hand to silence him, studying Lyra carefully. Finally, Koresh nodded once. "Then it is your choice," he said, his tone accepting but edged with a warning. "But know this, staying with him means living in danger. The ones who made you will not stop, not ever." Lyra's gaze didn't waver. "I have been hunted my whole life. I would rather face it with him than hide without him." Koresh stepped back, motioning for his people to return to their ships. The engines roared to life, kicking up clouds of dust as they rose into the brightening sky. Ethan and Lyra stood together, watching until they were gone. The desert once again silent except for the wind. After a while, Ethan said, "You didn't have to choose me." Lyra's ears flicked, and she gave him a look halfway between amusement and certainty. "You think I chose this because I had to?" "No. I chose because you are mine." Ethan let out a short laugh. "Yours, huh?" "Yes," she said simply. "My pack." They began walking. The colony far behind them now. The sun climbed higher, painting long shadows across the dunes. At first, they said nothing, just moving side by side. But Ethan noticed something. Her steps always matched his. Whenever he slowed, she slowed. Whenever he glanced around, she was already watching the same spot. It wasn't just loyalty, it was instinct. They reached a small outpost by midday. It was nothing more than a cluster of metal huts and a fuel station. The place smelled of oil and sun-baked sand. A few traders nodded at Ethan as he passed. but their eyes lingered on Lyra with a mix of curiosity and caution. She ignored them completely, keeping her gaze on him. Inside the outpost's main building, Ethan arranged for supplies, extra water, fresh rations, replacement parts for his workshop equipment when he returned outside. Lyra was sitting on the steps, her tail curled neatly. She looked up at him as he approached. "Where now?" she asked. "Anywhere we want," Ethan replied. Adjusting the strap of his pack, her ears twitched in a way he had learned meant she was pleased. As they stepped away from the outpost, the road stretching into the endless desert, Ethan glanced at her. "You know this means you're going to be stuck with me." "Everywhere." Lyra's golden eyes softened just slightly. "I slept by your door the first night," she said. "Now I will walk beside you." Everywhere, and in the empty stretch of desert, under the heat of 2 suns, Ethan realized something. He had started the night with a stranger at his door. Now he had a pack, and that made all the difference.